Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from AlexMercedCoder.dev, grackoverflow.com, devnursery.com, and the Web Dev 101 podcast, so subscribe to that please. And what I want to talk about today is just kind of how to set up a basic HTML, CSS, and JavaScript project, get it up to GitHub, and then get it deployed so you can actually see it on the internet. Okay, so we're not going to actually build the thing, but the idea is that generally, like when you're doing a project, one of the things I always recommend is to get all the basics done out of the way. Get the deployment, get all that stuff set up right away. So that's just one less thing you have to worry about while you're building it. Then you can just kind of commit freely. The thing just updates as needed, and you're good to go. So what I have here, and again, this is going to be based on an HTML, CSS project. This would be slightly different for, if you're doing something like React, Svelte, Vue, Angular, not that much different. And I do have guides on deploying React, Vue, Svelte projects over there at, if you just go to Grok Overflow or toots.alexmercedcoder.dev, you can find all of that. Okay, but bottom line is just open up your VS Code or your whatever editor you're using to an open empty folder. Okay, so the idea is generally when you have a project that you want to work on, it should just be contained to one folder to its own Git repository. Okay, so bottom line here, I'm just going to use terminal to make this pretty straightforward. Okay, so I'm going to use the touch command because the touch command creates files. So I'm going to say touch, I want to touch a index.html. You always need to start with an index.html. The index.html is the file that generally like the main page will always go to. Okay, so if you create a website called abc.com, abc.com, when you go there, it's going to load up the index.html. That's always sort of the entry point for a website. Okay, unless you add like a file name at the end, which people don't naturally do. So I'm going to touch index.html. I'm going to need a JavaScript file, so we'll just call this app.js. It doesn't really matter what you call these files. And a styles.css. This is just my normal naming convention. I think a lot of people have a very similar naming convention, but I'm going to create these 3 files. Okay, I'm going to keep them all in the same folder just to keep things simple. And I'm going to open up the index.html, put in my HTML boilerplate using Emmet and VS Code. So I just hit the exclamation point, and there we go. And then I'm going to want to connect my JavaScript file. So I'm going to use a script tag. So I'm going to do script. So again, using Emmet, I can just type in script, then select source. And then I'm going to put in the name of the file. So again, when I put the name like this, that means that it's in the same folder. So right now, see index.html and app.js are in the same folder. Now, what if I wanted to organize my stuff into different folders? So let's say I wanted to create a folder called JS for JS files. Okay, and I want to put my app.js inside of there. Okay, and make that where I work out of. So, and again, you can tell it's in the folder because see, they're not lined up. Okay, so again, a lot of people always get confused when they're looking at there and trying to pick up on like what level the different files and folders are. Okay, always pay attention to the indentation. Okay, so I can see that this app.js is inside the JS folder. So I have to make sure that I specify that this is in that folder. So you always start with a dot, which represents the current folder, because again, the index.html is inside the HTML CSS project folder. So starting the dot represents the folder that the index.html is in. Now in that folder, there's a folder called JS, and in there is a file called app.js. So you notice the difference because it's in a different folder. So it's very important that whenever you set up your script tags, that it points exactly to where the file is. Okay, I'm going to just move this back up to the main area, and then get rid of this JS folder, just to keep it simple. But again, if you wanted to organize your code, just make sure that you adjust your references to the files so that way they're always referring to where the file actually is. I'm going to want to put a defer keyword because we want to make sure that this script does not run until after the DOM has loaded. Then we will connect our CSS file. So we'll do a link tag where we link our CSS file. And again, make sure it's the right name. So my file is styles.css. So this is the match to that. Okay, good. And let's say you wanted to use jQuery. I would head over to the jQuery website. So I'd go to code.jQuery.com. I would copy the jQuery script tag. And again, or any other libraries you'd want to use, whatever other front-end libraries you want to use. If you want to use a script tag, this is, I would set that up right away. I always put those before my own things. So it should always be your third-party libraries, then your script tag and your link tag for your stuff. Okay, I'm gonna just hit save so I can auto format. Okay, and there we go. Okay, and what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna add an H1 here, just so that way there's something visible. H1, this is my project. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to open this up in live server just to make sure that it's all working so far, because generally if it's working here, it should all work when I'm deployed. So I'm just going to open it up with live server, the index.html, just open up, inspect, and I'm going to take a look at sources just to make sure everything's connected. So I can see that my app.js is connected, I can see that my styles.css is connected, and I can see that my code.jquery, the jQuery file is connected. So everything is connected, so everything should be working just fine. Okay, all good. Only other thing I want to check is just make sure that jQuery, because what happens if you forgot this defer keyword, you're going to have a problem. So one way to check for that is just the console.log. If you're using jQuery, I'll console log the $ function. And then I should, if it's working, see I get the jQuery function as the log. Like for example, if I take out the defer keyword, so if I take this out, this is going to run before everything loads. And actually, that still loads before, so technically not an issue. Yeah, that would be a problem if I had put the script tag before the jQuery script tag. So that's a good way to just double check that you have them in the right order. If I really wanted to check that the defer keyword is on, then I need to do something with the DOM. So I could just do something like, const body equals $body, and again, this is how you grab things in jQuery. So I'm grabbing the body tag, console.log the body tag, and see I have the body tag in there, so that's good. But if I didn't have the defer keyword, see, then I get an empty array. Okay, so that's how you know that, oh no, I forgot the defer keyword. Okay, so I got all that. It's all working. Okay, so I don't really need this open anymore. Okay, so now the next step I'm going to do is I'm going to so right now, first thing I'm going to do is make sure that I'm not part of some other Git repo. So I'm going to do git status. And that's what I want to see. I want to make sure that right now that none of my parent folders are a Git repo. So I should get fatal, not a Git repository, which means good. I'm working in an empty folder that is not a Git repository yet. And then I'll make it a Git repository. So I'll do git. And again, you can do this from VS Code too. So you could always go over here to VS Code. Okay. And do like initialize repository, and that'll do the same thing. So I could either do git init, which would do the same thing. Git init would create a Git repository. The same command would be if I click here, if I click initialize repository, see now I have a repository in there. It just did the same thing for me. Okay, now what I could do is I could just do this manually. I could do git add dot, which would add all my files to staging. I could also just do it here with VS Code. The way to add them all to stagings, I would just click the little plus button to each one, and that would add it to staged. So you can see staged changes. That's the same, so I'm just doing them one by one. Once they're all staged, which means they're ready to be committed, then I could either go over here in the terminal and do like git commit -m, and then say, commit message. Or I can go here to VS Code and type in a commit message saying, first commit, and then click here to commit. Okay, beautiful. Okay, now that's been committed. The next step is we want to push this up to GitHub. Okay, so what I'm going to want to do is I have to head over to GitHub. So go to github.com. Make sure you're logged into your account. I'm going to create a new repository. And I'm just going to call this like a sample project. You can call it whatever you want. Keep it public. Do not check off any of these boxes. Just leave all that alone. Create repository. Okay. So you can kind of ignore all of this. All I really care about is this URL here. Okay. This is the URL that allows you to push to GitHub. Like this is basically saying that's where your repository on github.com is. And I want to tell Git to push to that. So there's two ways I can do that. I can use terminal, and I can do the command git remote add, give it any name. Usually you call it origin, and then you would paste the URL. Okay, so I could put that command and that would add it, or I can use VS Code. In VS Code, you would go to here to remotes, and I just say, hey, I want to add a remote, and then I would just put in the name, so we'll call it origin, and then we put in the URL. And then again, be careful when you're selecting the URL, make sure that you have the right thing selected. So if you have SSH set up and you've added your SSH key to your GitHub account, then you want to use SSH. If you don't have SSH set up, and if you don't know if you have SSH set up, it means you don't, then you want to use the HTTPS URL. Okay, so see HTTPS stands with HTTPS, SSH stands like with like git at. Okay, so just make sure you're using the right URL. It'll make your life a lot easier. Okay, then once I pass in the URL here, ta-da, and see now it's been done for me. Okay, and the way you can always check, again, 2 ways to check. I could also do it with terminal. I could type in git remote -v. That'll list any remotes that I have set up. See, there it is, origin. And again, I should also see it here in VS Code. So again, this is all under the source control section. Okay, cool. So I now have origin. And what I want to do is I want to push my code up to origin. Okay, so what I can do is I can click here. Let me see what my options are. Fetch, connect to remote, open repository on remote. Okay. Now, again, I can push by either using the terminal. So I would type in git push, and then I would type in the name of the remote, which we call the origin, and then it would be the name of the branch, which is either going to be main or master, depending on your setup. If you're not sure what branch you're on, you can always take a look here in VS Code. So here in VS Code, it tells you what's the name of the branch you're currently on right there. Okay? So I see I'm on the main branch. You might be on master. But it'll be git push origin, either master or main, depending on your git. And that would push the code up. Okay, I think with VS Code, I think I could just hit publish branch and that should do it. Let's find out. Okay. And I think that did it. Okay. So the way we can check is I can refresh here on GitHub. And yep, so it published my changes. Okay. So that did the same thing as doing git push origin main. Okay. So again, you can use VS Code to make your life a lot easier when you're working with Git. You can use terminal. Terminal is always, to me, the best way because it's the one way you'll have no matter what tool you're using. But, these conveniences can be nice. Okay, now, and then again, you have also sections for all the other cool things you could be working with, like branches and whatnot, but we won't go there right now. Okay, so now that I have this here, I realized there's one other file I want to add. Okay, because one thing your project should always have is documentation. Okay, so I'm going to head back to my file explorer here by clicking over here, and I'm going to add one more file called readme.md. Okay, this is what's referred to as a Markdown file. Okay, generally like whatever shows up here, like your in your project, like your project documentation, the visual thing here on the Git repository, that's all what's in your README. Okay, and it uses Markdown syntax. Now, if you don't know Markdown syntax, which is something you should really learn, you can always just look up Markdown syntax. So just like Markdown syntax, just Google it. And here we go, we have basic Markdown syntax. Okay, and you can look it up here. It's pretty straightforward. I'll show you a few things. Like, if I want to do a heading, like one hash is like H1 up to 6 would be like an H6. But essentially what I would do is I'd be like, okay, this is my project. And then maybe in a smaller heading, I would say, by my name. Okay. Then, you would type in a bunch of text. That would be like, just your documentation. And then every time I have like a little like section, I might just do, section, some more text. And then let's say I have a link. This would be like the link text. And then in the parentheses would be the link URL. So like, https www.google.com. Okay, and if I wanted a picture, I would do exclamation point. This would be like the alt text. And then I would put the link to the image over here. So if I were to grab, images.google.com, And let's just say a puppy. Okay, and let's grab that picture. Copy image address. I can put that right there. Okay, and again, the cool thing about VS Code is that it lets you preview a Markdown file. So if I right-click here on the Markdown file, I should be able to preview it. Well, sometimes it lets you preview it. Yeah, I think that option disappeared on my VS Code for some reason. Usually it's there. For some reason, for me, it disappeared. Is it an extension thing? Markdown preview. Yeah, I have it installed, so I don't know why it's not working. Yep, and I have this one, which lets you like preview it, you know. But it doesn't want to let me preview it. I think it's just because I have too many commands. Okay, well, I'm not going to worry about that right now. Okay. But just to kind of show it to you, what I'm going to do is I'm going to push this up. So I'm going to go back to my source control here on Visual Studio. I'm going to add this to staging. And then I'm going to say, hey, added readme. That's going to be my commit message. And then I'm going to hit this little checkbox here. Okay, and then what I'll do is I'll click on sync changes so it pushes it up. This action will pull and push commits to origin main, and that's okay with me. So that's going to push up on my commits. Now if I go back to GitHub and I refresh, see there's my readme. Okay, so you see when I did like the one hash, I got a nice big title. When I did a few hashes, type in some text, you know, you get these nice little sections. Like see there's a link, there's a picture, and generally you would build out your documentation from there. Okay, so this is generally how you would build the documentation for your project, because you always want to document anything you're working on. Okay, especially if you're like a newer developer who's looking to get hired, they will look at your projects and they will look at your documentation to see what quality of documentation you're writing. And in your documentation, you should be talking about, you know, what does your project do, what technologies you use, anything that people would need to know when they're using your website, you know, more information about what you did, so that way people can learn about what you did from your documentation. It's good practice. It's really good to get used to writing Markdown. Okay, but now we want to actually deploy this website. There's a couple different ways we can deploy this. Okay, the first way is you could use GitHub Pages. Not my favorite, but it's pretty easy. All you would do is you would have to head over to settings. So you would just click over here to settings. And then another nice little thing you can do is that if you want to take this, like make this template and make it a template you can use over and over again, you can click Template Repository here in settings. And what that does is going forward, when you go take a look at the repo, you can click use this template and you can make a copy of it. And then you can clone it and then use that as your starting place, which is pretty nice. Okay. But what you'd want to do is you want to go down here and we want to look for GitHub Pages. So we just keep scrolling down until we find it. Pushes. Okay, so it's probably not there anymore. It's going to be some other section. Here we go, Pages, GitHub Pages. Okay. And basically what you're going to do is you're going to deploy from a branch. So you choose which, so we're going to say, yeah, just classic. And then you're going to just say, hey, we're going to deploy from the main branch. So the main branch will be what's deployed. You could choose other branches. You choose what your main folder is, just choose root. That just means like, that's why everything needs to be in that main folder. And then you hit save. Okay, and that's done. Okay, so let's see, it should give you the URL somewhere. Okay. GitHub Pages design the host, your GitHub Pages site is currently being built from the main branch, learn more. So this is going to take a little while for it to build, but then once you come back here, it should refresh and it should give you like the URL. But essentially what's going to be, it's going to be like your username, whatever your username on GitHub is, .github.io / the name of the repository. That's going to be what the URL is. Okay, but you can come back and check it down here and you'll be able to get the URL for the deployed website. It's not very instantaneous. This is why generally I would prefer something like Netlify or Vercel. Okay, they both generally work the same way, so I'm just going to do Vercel. But if you use Netlify or render.com, which are also great, they work the same way. Essentially, you just connect your GitHub, say this is the repo, done. So I head over to Vercel.com. It's free. All of these are free for basic projects. Okay, you log in. generally you should log in with your GitHub credentials. So you log in, and then you're going to say, hey, I want to add a new project. And it's going to ask you to connect to Git repository, so I'll connect with my GitHub account. And then, okay, we had the sample project that we just committed 2 minutes ago. That's the one that I want to use, so I'll click import. I don't really need to change anything here, so you can just leave all that as is and just hit deploy. That's all for like more advanced things. And then you just wait for it to build, and there it is. Your website's deployed. So now if I head to, if I click here, there's my deployed app. There's the URL for my deployed app. And then again, the cool thing about using like Vercel or Netlify or GitHub Pages, it's all linked to the GitHub repository. So you don't actually have to go back and update this. Anytime you update the GitHub repository, the website automatically updates. So you can just focus on building your app, pushing it to GitHub, and everything will just automatically like update. But again, this would be the same process if you were using netlify.com. Okay. Or if you're using like render.com. Again, you would just connect that repository just like you saw me do with like Vercel. Okay, all of these are free for basic static hosting. This is when you push up a few like HTML and JavaScript files and say, hey, make me a website. So those are going to be the easiest ways to deploy your website by far. Okay, there are other options such as like Firebase. There's one that starts with G that's kind of escaping me, something like Grunge or Gears or something like that. There is, you could use any of the big cloud providers such as Amazon, Azure, or Google Cloud. Generally, those will cost you money, with the exception of Google. There is some free options with Firebase, but still not quite as easy as using Render, Vercel, or Netlify. So generally, that's going to be what I recommend in those early stages if you're an early developer, or you're just creating a simple project like this. So, but yeah, so that's how you set up the project, get it up on GitHub, and deploy it. Our project is deployed. Okay, so now going forward, anytime I make an update, this deployment will automatically update itself because it pays attention to that repo. Okay, and I can manage all my deployments. Makes it really easy to do all this kind of stuff right here from Vercel. So my name is Alex Merced from AlexMercedCoder.com. Have a great day and enjoy.